All right, so if everybody who's willing to grab an empty seat has it, we're going to start this process, and you'll have an opportunity to sign the sign-up sheet before you leave, so we'll know that you were here. There are still some presentation materials available, and agendas were passed out. We may have run out. I'm not sure. But welcome. This is a public hearing of the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries and the Massachusetts Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission. My name is Paul Diodati. I'm director of the Division of Marine Fisheries, and I'm joined here with one member of our Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission, Mr. Ray Kane, to my left. And it's a 9-member advisory board. The way the process works is that for us to do rulemaking, to develop fishing laws, the director of the Division of Marine Fisheries will make a proposal or recommendation for a rule change or a new law, and we'll take public comment as we are today. And then after some consideration, I'll make a recommendation for the rule change to our Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission. They then either vote that decision, that proposal, up or down. And so if they vote it up, then the law is implemented, becomes ratified through our legal process. So that's how the process works. I'm also joined with other members of the Division of Marine Fisheries to my right. One of our deputy directors, Dan McKiernan, one of our assistant directors, Dr. Michael Armstrong, and one of our policy analysts, Jared Silva. These are gentlemen that you might talk to on the phone if you call the Division of Marine Fisheries. Before I begin the hearing, I want to thank State Representative Tim Madden, who I know is here because I just spoke to him. Tim is somewhere in the room, for bringing this matter to our attention early on, some 9 months ago. And then we did hear from the selectmen, but Tim has been very, very active with issues both here and on the vineyard. And I have to say, we have spent more time as a state agency on the islands with Tim. So we appreciate him getting us our travel mileage. I don't know where Tim went, but I'm sure. Oh, there he is. Hi, Tim.
Well, I want to thank you for coming. I also don't want to take the credit. There's a lot of fishermen in the room. Pete Pazer has been very active. The Board of Selectmen. I think I saw the town manager, and I see several of the selectmen here. But I just want to welcome you and thank you for coming to the island. I know you were on the vineyard yesterday, and like you said, you've become a regular on the island with your staff. It hasn't gone unnoticed, and I appreciate it.
Okay.
You can see a lot of citizens here who I appreciate all of you coming out in this weather. This is what we do in January on Nantucket. So when we have a hearing in January, you can expect people to come in and get warm.
So we know where to go.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming and hearing our concern.
Well, you're very welcome. So before we begin the hearing, and this is one of 4 hearings, public hearings on this rather long slate of agenda items. We held 2 yesterday, one on Martha's Vineyard and one at the Mass Maritime Academy, and we'll hold our last one next week, Tuesday, I believe, in Gloucester. And then the written comment on all of these matters remains open until January 23rd. And those could be provided in emails or writing to the Division of Marine Fisheries, and that information should be somewhere on your handouts or on our webpage. So I have to read some legal language into the record to make this an official public hearing, so I'll do that. Under the provisions of Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, and pursuant to the authority found at Mass General Laws, Chapter 130, Section 17A, 21, 52, 80, 100A, and 104, the Division of Marine Fisheries and the Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission have scheduled 4 public hearings and a public comment period to accept comment on draft and emergency regulations located at 322 CMR 6, 7, 8, and 12. So the order of business, we're going to take it a little bit out of order than the handout reads. And I think what we'll do is I like to jump right to the issue that I think is of most interest to folks in the room, and that is the squid fishing issue south of the islands. And then the second item, I think we'll go to the striped bass regulations. And then we'll fall back into our regular schedule for the rest of. Okay, then we'll go to surf clam. So we're going to go a little bit out of order, and Jared will jump the presentation around so that if you want to leave after you hear the item that you're particularly interested in, I'll pause. We'll have an opportunity for you to get up and leave. So with that, why don't we begin with the small mesh fishery for squid. And most of you are probably familiar. We do have a small mesh squid fishery. We've had this for decades, and after June 9th, the fishery is not allowed within our state waters. So south of the islands, you have to move out to federal waters if you're federally permitted properly to do so. So small mesh is it's a little less than 2-inch mesh. It's about 1 7/8, I believe. And then after beginning on June 10th, you can still fish in state waters if you're properly permitted, but you have to switch up to a larger mesh net. It's a 6.5 by 6-inch mesh in different parts of the net. The squid fishery continues, however, in federal waters. It's a federal fishery. It goes on, fish, they have a life cycle. They only live for about 2 years. Spawning takes place, pretty much done probably by the end of July, I'd say. But the fishery will continue to be conducted outside of state waters on the 3-mile line and beyond. Typically, squid fishing takes place during the daytime. And, squid is those of you familiar with squid, you see people fishing at night, they're attracted to the lights, they come up close to the surface, so they're not as available for dragging on the bottom at night. And so often, what happens is the fleet fishing in the offshore waters might come into state waters and anchor there, drop a door or an anchor, or somehow tie up there for the night and stay out of the traffic lanes and so forth, and then get out early the next morning. So for the past several years, recent years, since 2010, 2011, squid fishing hasn't been that productive. The stocks, for whatever reason, aggregations of squid have not been that abundant or available. We've seen landings go anywhere from 30 or 40,000 pounds to about 2 million pounds, which isn't a lot. And so since 2011, we would have every year, we would get a request or two from some of our state fishermen, typically small boats. Again, to fish in state waters, you have to be properly permitted by the state. Your vessels cannot be larger than 72 feet, and you can't fish at night. So state permitted vessels fishing for squid, in some sense, have limited opportunities for what they're going to harvest during the year. So after June 9th, beginning in 2011, it was common for us to get a request from some fishermen to continue fishing beyond June 10th in state waters. And that's with the hope that the squid would be available. Obviously, the squid don't hold themselves after June 10th to the 3-mile line. They're pretty well distributed, sometimes fairly close to shore. So we would consider that and typically issue what we call a letter of authorization. And so we did that for a number of years, beginning in 2011. And the number of vessels that received these letters of authorization to continue to fish for squid, or at least until the fluke fishery started, for about three more weeks, and then there's no fishing, squid unavailable after that. We issued anywhere from about 1 to 10 letters of authorization. And so that went on without much interruption, concern. It's been a fishery that's been ongoing for quite a while, as I said. And finally, as we got into 2014, and fishermen were beginning to request the consideration for that authorization again. In fact, they were indicating the squid were definitely more abundant, and it was more profitable for them. They began requesting their letters of authorization. We began to issue them. At the same time, we thought, it doesn't make a lot of sense for us, given that we've been doing this now since 2011 without concern or any unforeseen negative impacts. Why don't we go ahead and rescind the rule and allow anybody who's legally permitted to fish for squid closer to shore beyond June 9th. And that led to us going through a public hearing process, except we didn't have one here, admittedly. And so the rule was lifted. Now, at the same time, interestingly, 2014 became a year for squid that was a little different than past years. They were much more abundant. There was also, perhaps because of other things going on in our fisheries in other parts of the state, and even regionally, limited opportunities for things, and there was more interest in things like squid, conch, other things that typically didn't attract the non-traditional user. We had much more activity in federal waters, and landings, which you can probably see, went up to about 4 million pounds this year. So in a sense, it was a very good year for squid fishing. So that's kind of the background on the issue. And I don't know if those of you are familiar with squid fishing. Although it uses a small mesh, it typically results in a fairly clean catch. It's pretty much squid. I mean, you're going to catch butterfish. You're going to catch some other things, but looking at the observer information that was collected, it's generally a pretty clean fishery. You don't see the kinds of bycatch and discard that you might otherwise perceive as occurring in the fishery. So those are some of the issues to keep in mind. With all of this, we did begin to receive questions, and Pete Kaiser, I think, led the charge for the island and bringing it to our attention, questioning what's different this year, why is there so much more activity? Well, certainly that activity, I kind of question, where it was, what activity was taking place. I know that there was probably more activity in federal waters, which we have no control over. But the amount of activity in state waters probably didn't increase significantly to the point where we thought it was substantially different than past years. Nevertheless, there were reports of vessels fishing at night, fishing inside state waters, well inside state waters, and I cannot support nor deny that. You folks know better than I do, but certainly if you're sitting on the beach or standing on the beach and you're looking out 2 miles and a fleet of boats is floating out there, it's difficult to determine whether they're fishing or what's going on if there's a lot of lights. But in my opinion, that's typically a difficult thing to do unless you actually go out there and see that they're fishing. But nevertheless, there were definitely more boats present. So keeping in mind that this is an active federal fishery that will continue to be conducted regardless of what we do today, we recognize that this community has been engaged in the issue and concerned about too much activity taking place in state waters. So, one of the reasons that certainly raises my attention is why we had the small mesh vessels move offshore after June 10th. And one of the prime reasons, in my view, is that during the summer months, there's just potential for negative interaction between other user groups. That's the time of year when other boats get on the water, smaller boats, even smaller boats than the draggers. And these days, sport fishermen are particularly active. Striped bass is very important to this community and others around the coast. And you're not supposed to fish in federal waters for striped bass, so you're forced to fish closer to shore in your state waters. So that interaction, I think, is something to be thought about and talked about. And so we, listened. We came out here in a public hearing, I think in the fall. Not a public hearing, it was a public meeting. And listened to your selectmen and State Representative Madden, we've been in touch with right along, and Pete and others. And we heard from some citizens that came to the meeting then. And I agreed to consider rescinding the action that led to the decision that we're dealing with. And so that's what this public hearing is about. And so I think I've explained it probably in more detail than I needed to. But I'd like to get your comments. I'll take any questions. We'll start with that if you have questions. And I think it might be best, given the number of people here, if as you have comments and questions, and I understand there's a lot of people for it, against. In fact, there was a petition, an online petition started, and I received, a few thousand people from, actually, it's not just Nantucket, around the world, that get involved in social media. It's not that kind of democratic process where I have a lot of people voting for something. It's about rationale. It's about why we want to restrict access to our waters, why we want to protect these waters, what's your perception of what's needed to be done. So it's all about rationale and how to best use our resources in space. So as people talk, it would be good for us to use these microphones so that everybody can hear your question and hear the response. So I'll ask you to, in an orderly fashion, come up to the microphones. And yeah, I'll take questions first. But again, I think it's best if you come up to the microphones. You can either ask a question, provide a comment, and you can do that now. You can start now. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a question. Can you put the slide up on the squid landings again? Because it was kind of bad. All right, so if I do that arithmetic, it went from 40,000. I'm not talking loud, okay? Because I'm in the middle of the world here. It went from 40,000 pounds to 4 million. And that, am I looking at that right?
Yeah, let me explain a little bit this. Paul didn't really get into the data too much. This is a fairly difficult issue for us to nail down numerically because we send our data people into the federal database, the vessel trip reports, and a vessel that's fishing in a trip has to give us give the trip a location, sometimes no more specific than one location, even though it may be multi-day and multi-tow in multi-jurisdiction, federal and state. So what we did is we tried to look at the trips that we thought were in the 0 to 3 mile band. Well, the data just isn't that precise because all of these boats, as far as we can tell, are federally permitted, so they're going to be fishing in both areas. So these columns are a tad confusing because if you look at the last two columns, 2013, we have 0 to 3 and 0 to 6. So what we're suggesting is it's fairly difficult for us to get the exact number for 0 to 3, but if we go 0 to 6, it kind of gives us a bigger sense of what the scale of the fishery is. So for me, the take-home point is not 40,000 to 3.9 million, but go back to 13, which is 193,000 to 3.9 million. So that's the really comparable number. So what that means is we had a 20-fold increase in squid landings between those 2 years. But if you look at the effort, and we believe that the effort increased by about 7-fold in that time period. And like any fishing activity, people react to abundance. If black sea bass fishing is good, more people go black sea bass fishing because the word's out. So we believe that this was an anomalous or an exceptional year in recent history for squid production, because the effort only increased about 7 times, but the landings 20 times.
So that's a pretty big increase, 20x.
Still threefold per trip.
10 to 20x, right?
Yeah, and that's the nature of squid fishing that we've looked at historically. Most of our focus has been on Nantucket Sound, where it's more self-contained, but we've had years going back in the 30-year time period that I've been working here, where we've reached 10 million pounds in a year, and another year could be 500,000. So the annual production is highly variable. For a lot of the dragger fleet, it's like a scratch ticket. You know, sometimes it's nothing, sometimes it's a little, and then some years it's really big. We think last year was a big year for production, but as well as availability.
I see you have a handheld microphone. Did you bring that yourself? Or is that? Oh, so-
I was trying to figure out what it was.
It'd be good if we can pass that around. I saw this gentleman had his hand up, and someone over here did as well. But go ahead, sir.
I just had a quick question. If this is passed, would you still be able to give out those letters of authorization?
On a case-by-case basis, I'll still give that consideration, right?
So that doesn't take away that.
No, it goes back to what it was. But, go ahead.
Now, barring that this is all passed and the boats are prevented from that area,
I don't know if that mic is on.
I don't think it is.
Oh, it is? Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Have you guys given any thought to how this is going to be enforced, patrolled, penalties? I looked quickly through this. I didn't see anything there, but I think that's the most important mechanism for me is what are the repercussions if they don't pay attention to you?
Right. Yeah, that's the case with all of our marine fishing laws and activity. They're subject to variable enforcement, and we only have one state enforcement official on Nantucket, and which makes it extremely challenging. In federal waters, certainly the Coast Guard is available to enforce infractions. And, you know, that can take place. The Division of Marine Fisheries itself doesn't have the authority or obligation to do the enforcement, which is a bit odd, but that's how it is. But if there is obvious, consistent, repetitive violations, then we have the ability to encourage our state law enforcement to work with Coast Guard and bring some attention to it. So that there's always that. Fines and penalties exist, and they vary depending on the violation. But in all cases, we have the ability to adjudicate and do an administrative action against a permit. If it's brought to the attention of the director of the Division of Marine Fisheries, we can always take a sanction against a permit. And we've done that a number of times, either revocation or suspensions. So there are penalties. They vary. They vary, and enforcement varies as well, depending on whatever else is going on the water. So, go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you. My name is Tobias Glenn. I'm a member of the Board of Selectmen here.
Yeah.
I took part in sending that letter to you, and I just, my family's owned a fish market on the island since the 19th century, and I just brought a picture of folks fishing striped bass in 1879. I can pass it around to you, but you brought up earlier in the meeting what we're trying to achieve, and I see these big numbers for squid, and what we're trying to bring is the fish onto the ground. A number of these gentlemen in the room aren't interested in going out and catching squid. We're interested in fishing, and one of the great parts of the island is being able to catch fish off the beach. And we used to be able to do that in abundance, and we can't now. And so my hope is to encourage the relationship between the Board of Selectmen and the Department of Marine Fisheries. Us on the island and all these gentlemen in the room and women would like to just encourage a relationship between the Department of Marine Fisheries. And I know you guys are come down here, and I wish you had better weather and could go to the beach, but it's I really appreciate you coming down and your concern.
All right, thank you. Very
Thank
welcome.
you.
I'd love to take a look at that. Anybody else? Just go ahead, Pete.
Yes, when Dan was mentioning about the statistics of the catching year after year, one thing that I'd like to emphasize is that we've witnessed this fishery go on, and usually about 10, 15, 20, 30 miles to the west-southwest is where they usually fished in federal waters. It was only about 4 years ago we started noticing a few boats on the 3-mile line. And then every year from then on, there were more and more boats over the last 4 years. Now, you think you've heard a lot of testimony, you probably heard today, and you've heard it at the last meeting. And again, when we talk about only X amount of boats in state waters with this amendment that went through, I believe it was testimony from the industry that said they wanted to be able to fish inshore because the federal boats at night were coming inshore into state waters. So therefore, the amount of pressure, the shift in the fishing pressure is greatly increased in the near coastal, waters. So I think that has to be taken into consideration.
Yeah.
Look 4 years ago where they fished. 5 years, 6, 7, 10 years ago, they weren't right on the 3-mile line.
Pete, I will concede that we had complaints about illegal fishing going inside, but I'm not sure it was nighttime. I think it was even daytime. And I think that was sort of frustration that non-authorized vessels, non-permitted vessels were going in
Federal
there.
boats.
Yeah, and the guys who had permits to go inside but couldn't fish with a small mesh were saying, hey, if this activity is going to happen in there, can we go in legally because it's happening illegally? So that was part of it.
Right. Well, like I said, I just want to bring that point up because all I've heard is multiple, everybody I run into or people keep talking about it, is the amount of increased boat pressure, dragging on the South Shore at night. I mean, I get people like from the airlines and stuff that said, it's wild what we're seeing down there now. 20, 30 boats at night. And I'd say, well, they must have been, this is before we knew about it. My comment would be, they must be, outside 3 miles. And here's the pilot telling me, look, they're not 3 miles out, period. So, I mean, this is how this whole thing got started. I just also wanted to, again, we were trying to get public awareness of this whole meeting today. And so about a week ago, with the help of a few people, we decided to make public awareness and start a petition, see who was really interested, in backing this. So it's been 1 week at this point in time, but we had it printed out. There's just shy of 3,000 signatures, and it's still growing. So it's not a small issue. I mean, everybody on Nantucket and, from around the states, around the world, people that enjoy this. So, all right, I'll stop for now.
Thank you.
My name is Jay Starr. I also have a charter boat on the island, and state and federal reporting. I'm required to do both. I'm sure I know both the state and federal squid small mesh fisheries boats also have to report. My question is the jump between the 0 and 3 mile 2013, 0 to 3 mile 2014, and in comparison the 13 and 14 years 0 to 6 mile. How are those boats required to report? Is it real-time information with a VMS ID from the boat, or is it just a piece of paper they fill out just stating where they were?
It's the vessel trip report. Some boats have VMS, but we didn't mine into that data because it's really complicated to try to backtrack VMS data with fishing location to the vessel trip report. So these, again, this is our best estimate. This is a state DMF analyst trying to make sense of a very large data set, made the decision if we choose the 0 to 6 mile band, we might be able to detect changes in fishing pressure or changes in activity. So that's what we've tried to bring you today. But it may not be 100% accurate because that single location that the trip gave us may or may not have been within 0 to 6, even though part of the trip would have been. But so we just bring this today to show you what we think is an overall trend, but I don't want you to take it away like it's gospel or super accurate, but it's our best attempt at describing the trends.
Right, I agree with the trending. So I guess my point would be to be more precise for those boats to actually have real-time data from the boat of where they've been. Basically, anyone can fill out a piece of paper and say, I wasn't inside the 3 miles, I was outside.
Well, this is federal reporting, so we're reaching into the federal database. The federal government is not asking them if they're in waters under the jurisdiction of the Commonwealth or are they in federal waters 3 miles beyond. Either way, they're still fishing under the authority of the federal permit, so they have to report. The way we run our reporting, our statistics program, if you are filling out a VTR, you don't have to fill out the state report. The VTR, we think, is sufficient. So again, it's just trends. And I think it captures, I mean, I think we've all heard there were more boats out there than we've seen ever before, and that's kind of captured in that last column. So we know that.
Right, I guess, but you know, to state again that they're just filling out a piece of paper.
Right, but those landings are real. 3.9 million pounds was landed in some dock, so that's a real thing. And
The landings are real.
Yeah.
They could have been inside the 3 miles
Sure.
and not said they were.
That's right. That was
my
fair.
point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And even if we enact this rescinding of the rule, they can still beat the 3 mile limit. So we may not affect the overall effort in that particular area. No, not inside. 3 miles and beyond. Yeah, that's right.
Thank you, Paul. My name's Bob Casa. I'm the Vice Chair of the Board of Selectmen, and I've also, my family's been in the fishing business since 1968, officially, unofficially long before that. But there's 3 points that I want to make. The Board of Selectmen, I handed you a letter today from the Board of Selectmen endorsing the overturn of this rule for my reason, 3 reasons. One is I heard you say earlier that they're not allowed to fish for squid at night. They're supposed to drop a door. I can tell you firsthand fact, in my charter business, I run south of the island to fish for different types of fish, mainly sharks and tuna. And I run through Matticat Harbor between Tuckernut and the island at night. And I go through that 3 miles in the dark. And I've come up on draggers, this year in particular, almost every trip, well inside of 3 miles, towing a net. So there's no doubt in my mind that they tow at night. Anyone who lives on the South Shore, who has driven the South Shore here during the months of May and June, see the draggers, and they're moving. They're not stationary. And they're well inside the 3 miles. For years, they all sat outside the 3 miles. You see the lights on the horizon. I don't make any argument about that, but there has been a change in the last 4 or 5 years. At the same time, I don't know exactly how many years ago, but we put a moratorium on river heron, or alewives, as we call them heron, but they're really truly an alewife. These alewives, we have 3 major spawning runs in Nantucket. We have Matticat Harbor up into Long Pond through the ditch, which is open 24 hours a day. We have Hummock Pond that we open every year, and we have Sagager Pond on the east side of the island, which we open every year. These heron come into the pond to spawn and then go back out during these exact same time period that we're allowing these draggers inside of 3 miles. And in my capacity as a commercial fisherman over the last 40 years, from time to time I have worked in this fishery as a dragger, as a deckhand on a dragger. And I fished with Pete years ago when we used to drag a little net behind his Bruno, and I can tell you firsthand in that case that we got heron and mackerel and butterfish and other fish besides just squid, and not just a few, but quite a few. And my concern is that we've gone 10 years now in this heron moratorium where I can't take one out of the ditch to use for a striped bass bait, but yet these boats can get a bycatch of who knows how much. I looked at your observer coverage, and it's practically nil. So when you say the observer coverage doesn't actually tie into what's there, that there's very little bycatch, the numbers are skewed. They don't work. And the third and final thing is that this is a small user group that's affecting a larger user group. Nantucket is a resort community. People come here for the beaches, the water, and to go fishing. And the numbers of people that come here as you said in the petition, from all over the world to catch striped bass and bluefish and enjoy a great day on the water, whether it's fluking or sea bassing, rely on those. We all, as charter fishermen and as recreational fishermen, rely on these fisheries. And our hands are tied as to where we can bass fish. We can only fish inside of 3 miles. And the forage is not there. The last 5 years, we've seen a decline, and this year it was the absolute worst. It's literally like fishing on a desert. You know, for years, we had, you could set your watch to when the heron and the squid came down around the backside of the island and through the rips. They didn't come this year. They weren't there. They didn't come back in the fall. The squiddos, the little ones that hatch, that come through Great Point in the fall, in July and August by the billions, weren't there this year. And all I have to do is look at those numbers, those efforts, where we went from 200,000 to 4 million, and I know where they were. They're in those nets. And you know, the reality is that other fisheries have been mismanaged by the federal government, and they've completely collapsed. So these draggers have nothing else to do. You know, 10 years ago, these guys were offshore cod fishing, haddock fishing, whatever. Now they're all concentrated on these squid. And if you don't repeal this law, our recreational fishing is going to go the same way of the codfish. We're going to be fighting to find a half dozen fish a day, and I don't want to see that happen. So I would urge you to overturn this. Thank you.
Hi, Josh Eldridge again. Quick question. In your paper that you handed out here, you left yourself a clause that you could extend the small mesh season if you didn't think the bycatch of juvenile black sea bass and fluke was going to be excessive. What would trigger that? You know, what requirements would you need to fulfill to extend that small mesh season?
That particular rule goes back about 20 years, and it really has to do with the Nantucket Sound fishery that typically ends on, I mean, legally, it ends on June 9th. When we have a year that's really delayed in terms of temperature, where the run is late, the makeup of the bycatch and discard is pretty predictable. We get big squid early, we get big scup early, we get sea bass early, and you start to get into the really small pin scup, mainly by the middle of June. But in a year like we had, 2 years ago, where it was so cold, everything was moved like 3 weeks forward. So in that case, we had observer coverage. The catch didn't look like mid-June, it looked like May. There was still a lot of activity to continue going. The squid catches were still profitable. The other thing is, in most years, the catch of large tubes in Nantucket Sound is usually not associated with a lot of bycatch. It's when late in the season it gets real mixy. So to answer your question, we would send observer coverage. We'd send observers out, which we have done. We're looking for quantities of very small scup, and it's kind of a seasonal thing. So a little bit of an art form, but if we know the season is delayed in terms of temperature, we'll typically extend it. But I don't think that, I don't envision this affecting this Nantucket Sound, I'm sorry, the South Side fishery at all. This is more of managing Nantucket Sound proper. That's an old reg, it's not new.
Okay, but mostly it's climate-driven and not
Yeah, it's
quota-driven.
seasonally temperature-driven.
Okay.
But we do send observers out, and we
Yeah.
have a lot of experience looking at what gets dumped on deck. And like I said, years ago when I first started, we used to have small mesh fishing that went right through July, and it was a lot of discards, as you've heard earlier. But now we monitor it. We're pretty comfortable that by shutting this thing off by June 9th, we minimize a lot of discards.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Rory Men. I'm reading on behalf of Thomas Malesko, who was unable to make it today. As far as the small mesh squid fishery off our coast, I'm vehemently against it. All one has to do is look at today's state of our fall fishery to see the future of our spring and summer fishery. Our fall fishery today is non-existent. Historically, we had world-class sport fishing for striped bass in September, October, and November. I had clients from around the nation and from different parts of the world fishing with me through the month of November. They were able to catch memorable fish as they came back every fall, just as the bass did. Over the past 10 years, our fall bass fishery has collapsed. It is a direct result of the disappearance of our fall run of herring. The commercial boats have wiped out all our herring. The bass have no food here, so they just bypass the island. Whereas I used to fish well into November, now we can pull our boats at the end of September. If it weren't for the run of false albacore, we'd have no fall fishing at all. Coincidentally, our fall run of big bluefish has also suffered. With a small mesh commercial fishery operating in the spring and summer, we've noticed a tremendous decline in the number of squid in and around Nantucket. The rips used to be full of small baby squid with the bass and blues chasing right behind them. This past summer saw our rips devoid of those large numbers of squid and less numbers of both bass and blues that feed on them. It's not too late to save our squid in our spring and summer fishing. If the small mesh boats are allowed to continue fishing off of our shores, our spring and summer runs of bass and blues will disappear like our fall run has. It goes without saying that this would be catastrophic to both the charter fleet here and all the sport fishermen who fish our waters. I urge you to not allow the small net fishery to continue. We need to protect the food supply for the many fish that swim in our waters. The second issue with the small mesh commercial fishery is the damage as far as the bycatch is concerned. These nets indiscriminately kill many other fish other than their target species. I've witnessed this firsthand. Coming along the south shore of Nantucket on a foggy morning a number of years ago, I started to notice a swarm of dead and dying bass along the shore. I soon came upon a dragger that was close to shore and hauling back. As I stopped to watch, I saw the crew was throwing dead bass back as fast as they could. These fish had been caught upon the net and did not have a chance. There were literally hundreds of fish just floating and dying. It was a huge waste that didn't have to happen. As long as these draggers can come within 3 miles with their small mesh nets, this lethal bycatch will continue. For the above 2 reasons, I urge you not to allow the small mesh fishery to continue. Thank you.
Go ahead, Pete.
Yeah, Paul, just one small item that you mentioned earlier, when Bobby talked about rescinding this regulation, the amendment to the regulation. But the thing that should also go along with that is the prohibition of any LOAs allowing the guys to come in and fish that area. I mean, there's basically no difference. If you're going to give out LOAs to fish inside, then this is all for naught. We're all wasting our time.
Yeah.
So we would urge you to take that into consideration out of all the testimony you're going to get here about bycatch, and it hasn't even gotten into the, we talked about the habitat, what's essential fish habitat. That'll be coming up. But again, we would urge you to prohibit, or we would love to see the prohibit, whatever, to not allow LOAs to fish in that zone.
Yeah.
State waters from the Navy base to Menemsha.
Go ahead.
Hey, Paul. My name's Dan Pronk. I own the lobster vessel Clarice. I fish primarily south of the island, and basically what these guys are saying about the squid boats is pretty much true about them fishing at night. I go through there more than anybody, and I spend more time down there than anybody does. I'm not a big fan of the draggers. I never have been, but obviously it's beat up the dragger day because basically everything that's being said, what Rory just read, and what everybody else is saying, it's beat up dragger day. But tomorrow, if there was a seal meeting, they'd be saying the same thing, except they changed the word dragger to seals. So, it doesn't really matter to me what you do with this, but I fish primarily offshore, and I lose between 200, 300, sometimes 400 traps every year to these squid boats. Last year, you opened up the beach, or inside of 3 miles, I lost 11 traps. So, it's not all the draggers. Everybody's stomping their feet about the draggers today. It's got a lot to do with the seals too, and everybody in the room knows that. So that's what I get to say.
I am getting a sense from how many people in the room are, opposed to letting the squid fishery take place closer to shore during the summer months. But at some point, if there's anybody who wants to advocate for the squid fishery and feels comfortable enough to do that, I'd like to hear your opinions about that as well. So, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Thanks very much for coming down to the island and holding the public hearing here. My name is Cormac Collier. I'm the executive director for the Nantucket Land Council. We are a environmental advocacy nonprofit on the island with over 1,600 members. Speaking with all the fishermen and all the people that are well aware of this issue, we definitely support rescinding the amendment. And I'd also like to echo Pete's concerns about the LOAs. And I would hope that in the light of this, and if you guys do decide to rescind it, in the light of all the discussion here, that there would be a strict internal policy to not issue LOAs that are essentially equitable to the amount of boats that are out there right now, that you pull back the LOAs. I imagine you're going to have if you do rescind it, that you're going to have a huge increase of requests for LOAs, but that you do basically respect what Pete said and take a further eye on that policy. Thank you very much.